All right, what is up, guys? Welcome to segment 2 of episode 2 of the Stack and Sat show, the show that takes hard to understand concepts within the Bitcoin mining space, the Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining space, and then does a deep dive breakdown overview of them, makes it easier to understand. I'm your host, Trevor. I'm joined today by Skot 9000. Skot, how are you doing today, brother?
I'm doing pretty good. Pretty good. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited
Yeah,
to be here. This is always
appreciate
good
you
stuff
coming
to
on the
talk about.
show. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love talking about Bitaxe, open source projects, Bitcoin in general?
I mean, I can't get enough of it.
I'm sure you can't, man. One thing, like before we get into the episode, how what was the feeling like for you back, in July of last year when someone found a block with a Bitaxe?
That was one of the craziest moments that I've had in a long time. It was really wild. There was a lot of things that kind of came together to make that just like a mind-blowing experience. I mean, first and foremost was that it was the first day of the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. So I was there. I was at Bitcoin Park. Bitcoin Park had some programming happening too, and I was sitting in an audience watching. I think Odell and Jack Mallers were doing a chat, and I just see this arm reach kind of like from behind me, and someone's showing me their watch, and on it is a text message that says "Bitaxe solves a block," and like I was like, wait, I didn't say anything, right? It was in a small space and there was like a presentation going on. So we couldn't really like say anything, but I'm immediately thinking like, no way, that's bullshit. Like, I don't think so. So, I get out my phone and start like getting on the OSMU Discord, and like people are blowing up on there. Someone starts just like calling me. I can't answer because I'm just like sitting there. And, it became pretty clear pretty quickly, thanks to a bunch of other people who are, taking a close look at this online, that it was indeed true. And it looked, very conclusively like a Bitaxe had solved a solo block with CK pool. And it was, I think I texted Rod, who was organizing the stuff at Bitcoin Park, and I'm like, Bitaxe solved the block. And as soon as the talk was over, he's like, Skot, like, come up on stage right now in front of everyone and like tell us what happened. And I like just had learned about this myself, like, adrenaline pumping, like excitement to the extreme. I got up there and I like told everyone, and I think there was the Tennessee state, not senator, but like an attorney general or something like that. State attorney general was there, like talking to Rod, and he's like into Bitcoin but pretty new to it. And Rod was kind of like, right there, just pitching him on the Bitaxe, and it was like, you got to do this. And so I just like handed a Bitaxe to him right there, and it was like, you got to start this. And then the conference got going, and was meeting all kinds of people who are had heard about this and were just excited. And it was very what's the right word? It was very it like, I had suspicions. Like, obviously we've done a lot of testing on the Bitaxe, but one thing you can't test is a full top to bottom solving a block, because you can't fake that. Like, the only way to actually test to see if a Bitaxe can solve a block and submit it to the network and get the reward is to like actually do it. We've done lots of tests, testing parts of it to kind of make sure that it works. And so I was pretty sure that it worked, but this was the first time it was like, okay, it works, which was really nice to see. Like, there had been some doubters, some skeptics posting online. They didn't think a Bitaxe could do it. And to see it actually happen was fantastic. It was
Yeah, I remember it, man. I remember when I got the text too, Bitaxe solves a block, and I was like, no shit. Like,
no shit.
that's amazing. And this was after we had done the interview on on the podcast, like the Build a Mind podcast, you know. So at
Yes.
that time, nobody had found one. So it was all kind of speculative. It was all just like, well, it's a cool project, but does it actually work? And now,
Right.
I mean, we've seen the progress in the Bitaxe project just explode. You know what I mean? Like people were talking about the Bitaxe before, but now everybody wants one. I mean, solo Satoshi can't keep them on the shelves. And now you've got things like the Zyber 8, which is 8 chips on one. You have the Emerge Axe. You've got people making small desktop water features with the Bitaxe. I mean, it's an amazing project. And the use case of like, or the actual like implications of, hey, this can solve a block, I think just kind of blew the project out of the water. So it was an exciting time for everyone. Just so that the audience knows, we're going to be talking about free and open source software. We're not necessarily talking about like the actual Bitaxe itself, but the code that goes into running the Bitaxe. Skot, you are the creator of that code. You know, created it, you open sourced it, you gave it to the world, and now anybody can take that code and build their own version of a Bitaxe and manufacture and sell those Bitaxes if they want to. Can you just, before we dive into the Bitaxe project, can you tell us what free and open source software is from your understanding?
Yeah. Before, I don't want to forget, we should come back to it though, because I'm not like the sole creator of this. This is an important part of the whole open source conversation. But so, you know, your question, what does free and open source mean? You know, right out of the bat, it doesn't mean free as in beer, like there's no cost for this. It means free as in freedom, libre, right? Like you have the freedom to do with this what you want. And it's been around for a long time. It's usually applied to software, but you know, certainly it can be applied to firmware or hardware or mechanical stuff. It just means that the recipe, the ingredient, you know, what you need to make this is available, and you have the freedom to change it and distribute your changes, right? So you have the freedom to take this and build on it, and you know, in some cases sell it, or in, you know, you have the ability to sort of enhance this or change it in the way that you want to see it. In addition to being able to look and see how it works on sort of this lowest level, you know, whether you want to verify that for security reasons or satisfy your own curiosity or just learn about it. Those are kind of all things that you have available there. There are, you know, this was, I think the concept of doing free and open source started like, I think early days when computers were just getting started, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was the whole scene in MIT, I think, with the GNU, and the Richard Stallman and the whole open source software movement that came around that was just this kind of militant idea that you shouldn't charge for software. It should be available open source, because there isn't, you know, there isn't, with the software, there isn't a cost for making more copies. There isn't necessarily a cost for people who want to distribute software, because you can copy paste it, right, and compile it. I think that kind of started the whole movement. And then fast forward to now, we have major operating systems like Linux is famously open source, and the kernel powers probably the majority of servers on the internet, powers a lot of embedded systems, you know, that run things from like microwaves to Bitaxes to you know, lots of things that are where these CPUs are embedded in hardware that you might use. And so that kind of has put this open source thing on the map, because we've seen this explosive growth in Linux and all the whole ecosystem all around it, I think, because of its open source license. But yeah, that's the idea, is that the software and the source is available for you. You have the freedom to do what you want with it, to understand how it works, change it, and distribute it. Now, there's lots of different licenses. You know, there's there's public domain, right? Which just says, here it is. You can do whatever you want with it. It is in the public domain. You are free to do as you want. You could change it to, to call it Trevor, and you could charge for it, and you could not give away the source with your changes. That's sort of the most permissive open source license. MIT license is similar to that, being in that you can basically take it and close source it. Now, then you get into the more restrictive open source licenses, like the GNU GPL, or the GPL stands for GNU Public License, or the CERN license, which is more for hardware. That's what the Bitaxe uses. And those ones, they require you to release your changes open source as well under the same license. And that I kind of like that vibe. That sort of prevents honest people from, putting in a lot of effort and not giving back to the community. And I think as we're trying to promote open source, I think it is important to give back to the community. Now, if you're a dishonest person, there's not really much we can do. You're just going to take it and close source it. And, we're not going to play this lawyer game. I guess you could. I think it has happened in the past with Linux. But it kind of keeps honest people honest, and it strongly encourages you to contribute back your additions to the community to sort of help move this forward, so that other people had the same opportunity that you did.
And it's something that I've been resonating with as I'm trying to develop out this episode, is that, the core ethos of Bitcoin is freedom and decentralization. The freedom to use the code and to decentralize the code, to proliferate that code, all over the world. And I think that's something that maybe that ethos stems from the fact that Bitcoin is free and open source software, but free and open source software kind of embodies that ethos as well, of collaboration and people being able to work on the code from within their own little sandbox, and then send it out to their friend or their buddy, or just some random person on the internet, and have that person build upon what was just done.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen, I think, several industries, like I mentioned, Linux and sort of the OS development scene, but a lot of the web technologies that we see and interact with on a daily basis on websites that we use are built on top of open source software. And it makes it so that someone who wants to try something, just a weekend project, can just try it, right? They can get the source for some, software, and they can tweak it. They can change it. They can deploy it. They can build stuff. And we've seen time and time again how these small little projects have become major industries in web and, all sorts of tech related industries. And it all started because someone wanted to do something and they didn't have to ask for permission, right? If you wanted to make a change to Microsoft Windows, you have to go get a job at Microsoft to get access to that software and to develop this idea. Not so much with Linux, or a distribution like Ubuntu, which is an OS on top of Linux kernel. You can just go get it, and you can try it, and you can screw around, and that's incredibly powerful, because for every 1,000 people that don't finish the project, right, there's one who creates the next big thing and builds on it and moves forward and hopefully releases it open source, so that can just keep cascading. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously we have Bitcoin because of it, and we have so many other really amazing technologies and projects outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem that also play into Bitcoin, and those are free and open source as well. I want to dive into the actual Bitaxe project itself. So you said you're not the sole developer. So who else helped to, who are the main contributors to the Bitaxe source code?
Well, so there's There's a lot of different aspects to the Bitaxe. There's the hardware, and then there's the firmware, which we call ESP Miner, which runs XOS, and even that has a lot of components in it. So there have been a bunch of different people who've contributed on a bunch of different levels, whether that's reverse engineering Bitmain and sharing what they find, to developing that firmware that makes ESP Miner so that it can work, into like improving the tooling, so that it can be built by anyone easily.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of people have helped out, and I think that those people have showed up and volunteered their time. I mean, they're incredibly smart people, many of whom work professionally in this industry, so their hourly rate is probably pretty high. But they're willing to show up and do this for free, volunteer their time for this project because it's open source,
Mm-hmm.
because of that ethos of we're going to share this all and we're going to move forward and help out, an important industry, with this. And this type of thing happens all across the open source development community. Is people, smart engineers want to work on cool stuff, and this is a good way that you can do that, and you can get your work out there. You can see a real improvement. It's a little bit different than maybe a bureaucratic engineering job at a large company.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of people. There's been a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people. People that I've met locally to me at Bitcoin meetups and Bit Devs, to people on the other side of the world who have just showed up through the Open Source Miners United Discord group, or on the Bitcoin Talk forum, or all kinds of places.
So too many to name is what you're telling me.
Too many to name. Too many to name. Several people that don't want to be named. They,
Right.
prefer to remain anonymous, and that's totally fine. You can do that too. But I wouldn't want to. I couldn't have done this all by myself. I'm
Yeah.
definitely not smart enough to do this all by myself. It's a huge job, and I am forever grateful for all the people that have helped out and continue to help out.
Mhm. So then what role, I mean, you're the originator of it. So what role did you play, other than, I mean, obviously you helped to contribute to bug fixes and other solutions for it, but what was your main role? What is your main role in the Bitaxe project?
Well, I came up with the name. I named it. That's actually a hard problem in computer science. I started the idea. I did a lot of the initial research to reverse engineer how to use these chips. For those that don't know, the chips that we use in the Bitaxe are from Bitmain, and they don't provide any documentation for these chips. You can't buy them. The only way that we're able to create the Bitaxe is by reverse engineering an Antminer, and paying very close attention to how that works, and recreating that. So I did a lot of that initial work to get that working. I created the first Bitaxe board. I'm an electrical engineer. I have a background in circuit design and PCB layout, and I've worked on a lot of projects like that before, not Bitcoin ones. But so I put that together and made 5 Bitaxes that were like quasi working. The firmware was not in any kind of usable place, but I like hand built 5 Bitaxe boards, and this was with the chip from the S17, and actually mailed them out. I gave one to a guy that I met here locally, and I mailed the rest of them out to people around the world, actually, who I had initially made contact with that were interested in helping out. And that was kind of their platform to begin contributing, of which they all did. It was fantastic. The initial contributors were just rock stars. And that's what took it from this sort of rough proof of concept to like, okay, this works. I can talk to this chip. I can make this chip mine. Like, I know the power specifications, all that good stuff, to like, okay, this is a product that you can plug in and it
Mm-hmm.
just works. So yeah, started it, got it going, created the proof of concept. I did a lot of the lower level like drivers for the chips. That's what my background is in. And now, yeah, I still work on hardware. We're on the like 5th major revision of the Bitaxe. So every time Bitmain releases a new chip, I get one of those hash boards and figure out what the changes are and make a new Bitaxe prototype with that new chip.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we got from the first one, which was just called the Bitaxe, to the Bitaxe Ultra, then to Supra, and then to Gamma. And like do a lot of like, okay, here's how, like I hook up, I get one of these, like you can see it back there, one of these Antminers, and hook it up to my logic analyzer. And I've gotten pretty good now at looking very closely at how they work and recreating that in the AXOS firmware to like provide that base level. And, you know, now throughout that, a lot of the other guys jump in and are very helpful too.
Mm-hmm. It's a project that, like you said before, takes many hands to build
Yeah.
what we have today. Obviously, the Bitaxe wasn't built in a vacuum. It was built in, you know, thousands of people's garages, basically. Curious, you know, from that, a question popped up in my head. Could Bitmain change their chip design or chip process completely, therefore making like new iterations on the Bitaxe mute?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they totally could.
Yeah.
If they wanted to stifle this, they could. I mean, they're playing this cat and mouse game with the firmware developers now, where they have secure boot on the control boards. So every new revision, they have to figure out how to break that just to load, you know, Luxor or Brains or something on the control board. They're playing that game. It's a lot harder to change the chips themselves. Like if they wanted to stifle Bitaxe development, that's a lot harder to do.
Yeah, like they would have to like redesign a new chip altogether.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I haven't seen it directly. I've heard rumors of chips that have encrypted communications between the chips. That would make my job a lot more difficult for sure.
Okay.
So yeah, they could totally do it. I don't want to give
So
them any ideas.
yeah, no, we don't want
I
to do that.
appreciate how they have not changed it very much over the last like 2 years.
Has there been any development on like other chips, like not just the Bitmain chips, but maybe like What's Miner or even Auradines chips?
Yes, there has. We the using the Bitmain chips kind of sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, it totally sucks actually, because this is not how electronics are made. Like normally, if you want to make electronics, you go to a parts supplier and you just buy all the components. They come on these reels that you load into a pick and place machine, and the boards get automatically built. That process works for everything else on the Bitaxe except for this chip from Bitmain, because there's no distributor that will sell you these Bitmain chips. So the majority of Bitaxe manufacturers, they buy brand new Antminers and just unsolder all the chips. There's like 200 chips in each Antminer. So they're unsoldering them all. Now they're used chips at this point. It's impossible. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to load them into a pick and place machine. And then there's the supply chain madness. Like it's a real limiting factor right now in Bitaxe development, is relying on this really sketchy supply chain for Bitaxe chip, for the Bitmain chips. So at like the end of last year, I kind of came up with a goal: is we're going to find a willing partner, a willing ASIC chip partner, you know, someone who actually will work with us. And that's what we need if this project is going to really scale to where it needs to be to make an impact, is we need to be able to get these chips.
Yeah.
So I've been talking to everyone and anyone that will listen to me. Bitmain is not interested. MicroBT does not seem interested either. You know, MicroBT is probably the second most popular ASIC manufacturer.
Yeah,
but I
they
feel like
create
that's
the
not.
What's Miner.
Yeah, with the What's Miner, correct. I feel like that's kind of a sideways move, though. It's like we're just gonna go to another unwilling partner
Right.
with WhatsMiner. That said, just recently, a contingent that I met, they're a big miner, and they're very interested. They have a lot of WhatsMiners, and so they're very interested in learning on a lower level how WhatsMiners work. They also have a lot of extra chips, and so they want to make Bitaxes with WhatsMiner chips. And so it's really early on that project, but there's some, there's a contingent going that way, and I think that's great. Like, let's do it. Why not?
Yeah.
I also have been working for a while now with the Intel ASICs. That project is kind of interesting. Intel got into the ASIC business a couple of years ago, decided they wanted to make a Bitcoin mining ASIC, and they did. And they made millions of these chips and then canceled the project and laid off all the engineers working on it. So all these chips exist. They're out there. Very few of them got made into miners. Like, they're just bare chips, like in cardboard boxes, like laying around in warehouses. So I talked to a couple of people that have those. They're not really usable for industrial miners anymore because they're a couple generations old. The efficiency is not so hot, but they would make good Bitaxes, and they're cheap. So I've got some prototypes made. We're seeing some progress going down that route. It's cool because data sheets exist for it. Data sheets are like the documentation for a chip. Chips exist new on reels. It's cool. The downside there is that the efficiency is a step or two back from where the Bitaxe is now, just because they're older chips. But I think people will like the price of these chips.
It sounds like there's trade-offs no matter which way you go with this project. Either you're getting the newest efficiency chips, but you have a price increase because of the time and the manufacturing process, and then also constraints with the actual production of them, versus a little bit of a drop in efficiency, but a drop in the price as well, because it's like you said, you could get real chips where you can create a process that is automated and start building these boards. So, I mean, it's a trade-off either way. Damn.
It is. I think people don't necessarily realize this, but when it comes down to it, the chip in the Gamma is $30 for one.
Yeah.
Like that, and then people are talking like, oh, I want the Zyber with 8 chips, or I want a 10 chip one. It's like,
but I don't want to pay $500 for
$300 in chips alone with nothing else on it.
And that's not even talking about like the actual, like the labor that goes into pulling these chips off the boards.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Which is going to have a yield, right? Because they won't all work when they come off the boards. You got to test them. It's a big pain in the ass. Yeah. And they're expensive. So I think that's a benefit for these Intel chips. So going that way. Talked with a couple others. I'm not sure if I can say them quite yet.
But
cool. It is interesting when I'm having these discussions with the chip manufacturers. Is like, unlike maybe some of your other customers, I am going to release everything open source. Like, I don't want to do it if I have to sign an NDA that says that I can't talk about how this works. And some people, it's a little bit of a new concept, I guess. Their other customers don't have that requirement,
right?
But yeah, if we're doing this Bitaxe thing with a new chip, it's going to be open source.
Yeah, the whole project is
a main selling point, as well as
it's the ethos of Bitaxe, man. Is like this open source. Like, you want to build one, you don't like the price that I'm selling it for, go build one yourself. Like, you can do it. And I've heard that argument before, is like, people don't like the price of the Bitaxe. Okay, well, you go make one. Like, you don't like the price, you go spend the 80 hours that it's going to take you to unsolder this chip and put it back on this board and develop it. But yeah, I mean, either way, some of the things that are coming out in this space is just, it's incredible. I'm really, really excited to see how this project develops over the next few years. I mean, you've seen it. You've got your finger on the pulse in the Bitcoin space, or the Bitaxe space, so some of the things that are being developed. It's pretty exciting.
It's very exciting.
along the lines of like, you know, what free and open source software is doing for Bitcoin and mining, I just kind of want to get your opinions. You know, what's your take on the future outlook of Bitcoin because of free and open source software?
Bitcoin is fundamentally open source. I've said this a bunch, but Satoshi's first ever public announcement of Bitcoin says, "I've created a new open source peer-to-peer eCash, or electronic cash." It's fundamentally open source. I think Satoshi correctly realized that if this project is to succeed and not be centered on Satoshi or a company that Satoshi started, that it must be open source. This is how you get sort of all of the control, the single point of failure, the liability away from one person or one organization. Is you get it all out there, because once it gets out there, it's very hard to rein it back in, whether that's because of regulation or otherwise. So I think Satoshi correctly realized that this needed to be open source. Now, I think mining is a very important part of Bitcoin, one of the most important parts of Bitcoin. And so it deserves to be open source as well. Because, you know, as we well know, if mining becomes centralized, we've got big problems on our hands.
It's done. It's basically it's all done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, right now we have it's scary how few people would have to be called to have a significant impact on Bitcoin. You know, how few Bitcoin miners would have to be coerced into filtering and censoring transactions to really have a detrimental impact. So we don't want that. So we need more decentralization in Bitcoin mining, and open source is the way to do development in a decentralized way. Because, you know, I couldn't stop Bitaxe right now if I wanted to. And I think that is, you know, not to have that ability is great, because it means it's very difficult to stop. I think people working on solutions for Bitcoin, applications in Bitcoin, especially in Bitcoin mining, they need to think about that. Like, if this, you know, Bitcoin thing is going to succeed, like we all hope it does, do you want to be a single point of failure, or, you know, one of a few small number of points of failure? I don't think so. So, you know, where we're going, you know, if Bitcoin is going to be this freedom money that the world needs, right? If we're going to fix the money, fix the world with Bitcoin, it needs to remain decentralized, and open source is basically essential in achieving that.
Yeah.
So I hope that where we're going is a lot more open source, and we see a lot more development on that front, because that's the other benefit, is this sort of, you know, that I mentioned before, is that people who can just pick it up and run with it, we get that exponential speed of development. Like, maybe it's a little slower in the beginning because there isn't necessarily money to pay for people's time, or there isn't initially. So it's a little slower to get things going. But man, once it gets going, and that you know, there's tools, people are building tools on top of tools, products on top of that, like it can get going very quickly. And so that rate of development is going to be, you know, face melting, which is exactly what we need.
Well, and I mean, you mentioned it before, like you couldn't have done this by yourself. Like when you take a broad look at what the Bitaxe project is, you know, all the different components, everything that goes together to put, you know, a Bitaxe. Here, I gotta pull this. I'm gonna just show it to everybody. But what it takes to get one of these on my desk in my hands, there's so many different components to it, and so you couldn't have done it by yourself, and you know, correctly like point to that. So I think that it's important to understand that without free and open source software, projects like Bitcoin, projects like the Bitaxe, like, they don't exist. And the amount of work that goes into creating this is so vast, so expansive, that it is a lot easier to get stuff done when you have thousands of people working on the project versus 10 people working on the project. So, you know, the reason why I wanted to cover free and open source software is because even though I'm not a developer, even though I'm not a coder, and I can't really understand like the inner workings of these things, a lot of these projects that I plan on building derive from the fact that it's free and open source, and I have the ability to build on these projects, you know? So I think that it's just a good building block to have this understanding of why it's important and why it's necessary.
It's a great opportunity for learning too, right? Like being a developer or a coder is not this sort of on-off thing, right? You can get in there, you can change small things at first, see what happens, you know. You can learn a lot through the process, and, you know, be careful because next thing you know, you might actually be a developer.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens, man. You know, last thing before we go, Scott, would you just, you know, leave the audience with a piece of advice? Maybe they're developers, maybe they're not, but you know, they are builders, they're people that want to tinker. What's your piece of advice?
Get your project out there, share what you're working on, share the source. You'd be surprised the people that are going to show up and the awesome ideas that they'll have. We're sort of like greater together working on this. So don't wait until it's perfect to like release it and get it out there and start talking about it, because that might be a while. It takes a while to reach perfection if you ever do. So I wouldn't want your project to just die in darkness while you're waiting for it to be perfect. Get it out there, meet some collaborators. There'll be some goofballs that show up, but there'll also be some just absolute geniuses. So yeah, do it. Fuck around and find out, and get it out there.
And find out. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for joining us on the second segment of the Stacking Sats show. This show, guys, it's an ongoing process, and if you guys have any projects that you want me to dive into as we start building out the lineup, send me them. I'm always looking for stuff like this. Scott, thank you so much for everything that you're doing in the space. We appreciate you, and yeah, just thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Trevor. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, we have work to do. Keep on building, keep on stacking. Peace out.
Yeah.